If you've ever wondered if something is making your toddler overstimulated or where to really draw the line on the level of stimulation that your child receives, today's video is just for you. Hey, if we haven't met before, my name is Holly. I am a pediatric occupational therapist, a mum, and the founder of Playful Pod, which is my play and child development membership community. I release new videos every Tuesday all about nurturing toddlers. So if you're interested in that, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell and you will be getting toddler tips every Tuesday. So today we're talking about overstimulation in the current society and like the way that we live today, especially post-pandemic. I think this is maybe a hidden key that every single toddler parent needs to understand, and also everyone that is working with young children. Our lives are much more stimulating than they were a decade ago. So today what we're talking about is not necessarily one event that overstimulates your child, although if that's what you're curious about, you'll definitely understand by the end of this talk. We're more talking about this concept of like chronic overstimulation. So like living in a cycle of being overstimulated. This is super relevant. At the moment, we know research is showing that like 1/3 of children aren't getting adequate amount of sleep. And sleep is one of our signs that our children are chronically overstimulated, that they're struggling to get to sleep. So what would we like kind of what would perk our interest to think, is this maybe a stimulation issue and not necessarily a behavior issue or something else? And that would be firstly, if you're noticing that your child is having a lot of meltdowns. For toddlers, the difference between tantrum and meltdown, I find it like they're a little bit too close, because the brain networking to actually choose and monitor and have intentional action behind your emotional expression isn't there for toddlers. So what we would consider a meltdown in older children is what a toddler tantrum often looks like. They're very, very similar. So basically like a big outburst of emotion. And of course, this is very normal for the toddler years. But if we're noticing that this is happening like more than generally, we say for toddlers, like we would expect most toddlers have around one tantrum a day, and generally these are like, around 5 minutes. So if you're noticing that you're having like 3, 4, 5, or even more tantrums or meltdowns a day, and that these are often longer, so they're like past 20 minutes or 25 minutes, that's perking our interest to say, is this about stimulation? Another way we would pick this up is a child that is very agitated and irritable. You all know that feeling, right? When you're like hangry, or you're just like overtired or whatever, and you're very snappy. So if you're noticing that your child is like that, and especially if that's not necessarily the way that they were when they were, say, a baby, or what you feel like is naturally their temperament. We also notice children that are like chronically overstimulated, they are very rigid in their thinking, and this kind of translates to very controlling behavior. So this is like, there's, again, an element of this is just very natural for toddlers because they're trying to assert their autonomy. But when you notice that it seems like it's kind of blocking almost everything that you do in your life, like, you can't open the door like this and you have to open the door like this, especially when it's very patterned things that they're wanting, that like every time you do the story exactly the same, and if you miss a word they like freak out about it. There's like a bit of rigidity that any kind of change, even the very small things like the sequences of how you open and close a door, or how you press an elevator button, like all of those kind of things, if they are really, really triggering for your child and you're noticing them in like many different areas, that would kind of perk our interest again. Another thing is when children have difficulty playing independently. Now, independent play is like a muscle, so it needs to be built. So this, if your child has never played independently and then you're just kind of like throwing them out to say now you need to, and they don't quite manage that's something different. But we're looking here at when children just really struggle to kind of get into play. They want you to be with them. The play that they want to do is often very like fast-paced as well. So they kind of struggle to settle into like some creative action and like some self-initiation within their play. So those are the things that kind of like perk our interest and want to wonder, is this about the level of stimulation that my child is receiving? So we often only pick this kind of thing about stimulation up when our children have already reached the point of a meltdown. So when they're really like well overstimulated. But actually stimulation is kind of like a cup. Like we all have a certain level of stimulation that feels good for our bodies in terms of every single one of our 8 sensory systems. So when we start to see that the cup is overflowing, that's when we see the behavior of the meltdown. But actually, it's that slow process that is building up that is the thing that's affecting your children. So here it's like really important to also kind of do that distinction between chronic overstimulation and children that are just maybe overstimulated by a certain event. So one thing that I want you to consider for today is your child's experience of the world. Look at their day, look at what is coming in, how they're experiencing things. If we look at something like going to a mall, like we can kind of understand, and actually there's some great YouTube videos on like children's experience of going into shopping centers. We can kind of understand how that would be overstimulating. But for most of us, we're saying like, okay, but my child's like this, and it's not that we're going to malls all the time. Like, I'm just interrupting for a moment to let you know about an amazing conference that I am speaking at in the coming weeks. This conference is all about sensory stimulation. So if you're listening to this is something that you're interested in, this really is the place for you to learn more. The conference is hosted by Tara Fisher, and it basically brings together sensory experts from all around the world, from different professions, and looks at how we can take a sensory savvy approach to raising our children. Whether you work with children or whether you are a parent, I would really recommend that you come and join us at this conference. You can find the link for that below. So I want you to look at the amount of stimulation that they're receiving in terms of screens. That's really, really important. In terms of the amount of places that they need to be like on the A game. You know when you like meet a new group of people and you have to be more like concentrated, you need to like show up as your more like vivacious self or whatever. It can like kind of weigh you down because you need to like kind of put on not a persona but the best version of yourself. And if children, for example, for one of my children, when we shifted to a new preschool, this was definitely something that was relevant because it's a new environment. There was also a new language. It was a second language. So there's a lot of like concentrating and deep focusing that needs to be happening. And that is using all of like the front section of the brain. And that can often lead to our children feeling just like really worn down and overstimulated. So look at that. Screen time was another one. And just like their overall experience of life. Now, the thing that I want you to try, and this kind of feeds into understanding their experience as well, is to have more movement-based and challenging play. You see, what happens often is that we presume that our children are like mini adults, and we think that like them being in like seated positions and just behaving well, especially when behavior is an issue, you just want to like keep them, contained, and putting them in containers, and again, like just too much sitting and too much focus on like passive mental engagement instead of full body engagement can be very, very overstimulating because it's not age appropriate for young children. So when we want to like kind of flip that on its head, if it is that you feel like possibly your child's daycare or preschool or the day-to-day life that they have doesn't have much flexibility in terms of changing things, then in the afternoons and the times that you have, we want to really up that movement-based play and think back to your childhood, all the kinds of movements that you used to do. I know it's not scary. I know it's so easy to think that our children are like little teacups that they will shatter if they fall down, and I'm not saying like let them, be like swinging on the top of the very top ladder, but like within reason, they need to be challenging their bodies. So spinning around, hanging upside down, climbing up the slide, running until they are exhausted, all of these things, trying to catch a ball, even when it's hard, all of these things that are like pushing them to the edge of their skill level in terms of their movement and really allowing them to move fully, like not just a yoga class in front of a screen. That's can be nice sometimes, but that's not the type of movement that we're looking at. We want like this free movement, this natural childhood movement. And what that basically does is that we have inbuilt sensory systems, our vestibular and our proprioceptive systems, that actually one of their functions in our body is like a release valve for pressure of stimulation. So they actually release in our nervous system all of that built up overstimulation. So it's like, again, we looked at the cup that was overfilling and we said, okay, we need to firstly see if we can take things out, like maybe some screen time or maybe some less amount of time that they need to be concentrating or sitting or having loud noises around them. So we're decreasing what's going into the cup, but then we also need something that actually pours some of that liquid out, and that is your big movements, your natural childhood movements. Next week, I'm sharing one amazingly helpful tip for increasing your child's time in independent play. This is one that I'm pretty sure you haven't heard somewhere else, and it is super, super powerful. So I will be seeing you next week.